Welcome to Friday Magazine's Arts and Entertainment for another week. Today we are truly honoured to be interviewing one of the most important principal ballet dancers of the last 50 years. Proud Australian Leanne Benjamin, OBE AM, is releasing her autobiography and she's on the line with us now. Good morning, Leanne.
Good morning, Leanne.
I know, a namesake. It's all in the name.
It means that we can't forget who we are.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Now, Leanne, you've co-written your Built for Ballet autobiography with dance writer Sarah Crompton.
Yes.
And it traces your history as a young prodigy in regional Queensland to your world fame with the Royal Ballet. And you've also worked with some of the greatest ballet companies in the world. Why was this the right point in time to document your life?
Oh, Leanne, that's an interesting question because I was asked to write my book not long after leaving the career, but I felt I needed more time. I needed to step away from the stage. So when I was approached again, just before the pandemic, by David Tenenbaum from Melbourne Books, I really thought it was the perfect time to put my thoughts onto the page. Not only have I had this incredible career, but I've been able to have a few years to step away from the career for several years before being pulled back into the studio to coach the dancers of today. So I feel that I have a wider spectrum on both what goes on in the studio and how it feels to sit as an audience member and what I have learned through my career to give to the new generation.
That's wonderful. That's really, really wonderful. And it's a superbly written book and it's an absolute delight to read. It just is a page turner. There's all these wonderful anecdotes and stories and the good times and the bad, and you're very honest. You're very honest. But
Leanne really wanted to be. I think most people have known me as Leanne, principal of the Royal Ballet Company. And a lot of people do not know the twists and turns and the ups and downs that I've taken that took me from the small country town or the small country city of Rockhampton to the world stage of Covent Garden and other wonderful theatres. It's a lot of work. It has been a lot of work. It's been a lot of fun. And I've had the opportunity to meet so many interesting people through the path. But as you say, what was interesting about it was reading how I navigated my career and how I picked myself up from all the mistakes that I'd made over the years.
And that resilience is a very important lesson for people. And it is an inspiring thing, I think, because ballet can be a really, really tough field. And you talk in the book about how you're a little bit more curious and a little bit more forthright than a lot of other principal dancers. So you asked a lot of questions and you wanted to understand the depth and meaning behind what you were being asked to do. And I've worked in management in the field and I didn't realise that there was a culture of being seen and not heard. I did not understand that at all. And I just so admire you for being able to work your way and navigate your way through all of that. How do you think you managed it?
I think it's just because I'm very outspoken and it used to get me into a lot of trouble in my youth and also in my latter years when joining a company because without trying to be rude, I feel it's important to be able to ask questions and to speak out. If others couldn't speak out, I used to speak out on their behalf and I wasn't afraid of that. I suppose it's just that I felt very comfortable in my own skin and confident. Trying not to be rude, of course, but how do you learn otherwise? And I thought it was, as I say in my book, when does a dancer grow up? You know, from a very young age, we are seen as beautiful, immaculate little budding ballerinas, which is fantastic. I think I'm all for that, to learn to dance to music, dance incorporates so many things, acting, telling a story, dressing up, all of these wonderful attributes. But in my early days, I was blighted by the fact that I was asked, not to speak up. And I feel that today's dancers have so much more agency and the door is always open to their leaders and their teachers now. And I think it's dance is a much healthier place now than it was in my very early years.
Yes, and I understand that. And it's just really interesting, though, that in the times where you were speaking up, that people must have still really respected your talent and really liked you to let you get away with it.
I think you hit the nail on the head, really.
Now, you were 16 when you started at the Royal Ballet School in London. So how do you get from a dance school in regional Queensland, in Rockhampton, how do you, no pun intended, take the leap from Rockhampton to London in one go? Because I know even here in Australia, people climb over themselves to get into the best dance school in the country to try and have a professional career. The idea of going from Rockhampton to London in one leap just mystifies me. I can't even imagine how that came about, other than it was your fate.
I think it was my fate. Look, I never thought of having a career. Unlike Leanne, you tell me a wonderful story about you growing up in your bedroom where your mother put a quilt on with ballet pictures on your duvet cover and little images of dance around the walls. I didn't have any of that. I wasn't subjected to dance in that way at all as an art form. I didn't know when I started dance that it could be a career. It's just something that I did and I loved and I did daily. And it was, to me, it was a hobby. It was something that I did after school as I became more interested and I don't even think I was curious, but I was told that I was good by other adjudicators that would come up from South or from London. And I was very fortunate to have a fantastic teacher called Valeria Hansen in our hometown of Rockhampton, and she idolised the Royal Ballet. Yes. And it was Valeria Hansen that encouraged her talented students to apply for the Royal Ballet School. Now, in the early days, in my days, it was just 3 photographs in various positions.
Oh.
Luck, possibly little references from the teacher, but now, of course, the dancers have to really jump over hoops in order to get to the Royal Ballet School.
Well, there's so many more. And even in Australia, I think when I last worked in dance, there was a survey done, by AusDance probably, that said at any one time, amateur or professional, 500,000 Australians are learning dance. Now, obviously not in COVID times, but that's a lot of Australians participating in some form of dance. Whether it's salsa or whether it's tap or whether it's ballroom or, whatever, people just go to classes just for the fun of it, almost underground thing, because you don't hear people talk about it too much, but it's there and it happens.
Well, I think there's a much larger emphasis on dance now. We have all these programs on the TV, Strictly Come Dancing and, Can You Dance? And, we had Billy Elliot that really changed the image of male dancers. Yeah. And I think that really did encourage male dancers to take up ballet and not be ashamed of being a dancer. And also the health attributes of it. And the fun you can get out of dance. It doesn't just have to be ballet. And do you know, in ballet companies around the world now, of course we all dance the classics, but even in the Royal Ballet, and I know in Australian Ballet, Queensland Ballet, it's all very mixed now. You have to be able to do everything. To be able to do all sorts of dance and work and collaborate with very interesting choreographers.
That's true.
In the traditional mould of classicism necessarily.
Even though they are the most beautiful ballets, aren't they? The costumes and the sets. And tell us some of your highlights, because you've danced in America, you've danced in Europe, you've danced in England, obviously. What are some of the highlights, like maybe some of the choreographers or some of the performances that have really meant the most to you?
Oh, gosh. Well, as most people will know that know anything about me, it was Kenneth McMillan who absolutely opened my world to what ballet could be, or what ballet could be for me, which was bringing out the dramatic side and being able to be a real human, strong, interesting, independent or not independent woman on that stage. His work was phenomenal for me to dance. as a dancer, sometimes you don't feel comfortable on certain stages. And it's not about the size of the stage. Sometimes it can just be something to do with the architecture or how close or distant the audience are to you as a performer. And some of the stages, there are a few stages around the world that I absolutely loved dancing on. One was the Kirov. The other was the Met in New York. I absolutely loved that. There was something about the connection between that audience and me as a performer. And I absolutely loved dancing at the Sydney Opera House, mostly because I know it's small. I know it's very, very small. But I think it was something to do with being in Sydney, being with my family and friends, dancing a role that I adored dancing, which was Manon, Kenneth Macmillan's Manon.
Yes.
So I was able to perform something of my repertoire that I very much enjoyed. And, of course, Covent Garden. I know Covent Garden inside and out.
Yes.
There are stages that I didn't enjoy dancing on as much. And that's obviously another conversation. But I always felt slightly disconnected when I danced at the Colosseum in London because it just felt so vast. There was such a big gap between the edge of the stage and the audience. And I felt I couldn't really reach them.
Do you know what's really interesting about what you're saying? There's a lot of discussion at the moment, particularly with musicians, about not having an audience and, performing online and doing all that. And it's not the same. And I think there's been a greater appreciation during lockdown about the two-way vibe or communication between the audience and the performers, and how in the past, I suppose people haven't really thought about it, or some performers have not really thought about the value of an audience, but the value of the audience is being discussed regularly in interviews at the moment. And it's really interesting what you're saying because you're completely reinforcing that.
Oh my gosh, it's all really about the audience.
So what is it about an audience that spurs you on? What do you get from an audience as a performer?
Interestingly enough, when you're a performer on the stage, even though there's complete silence in the audience, you know whether or not you've touched them. And I found that extremely interesting and fascinating. If I could hear a lot of coughing or some rattling or something as a performer, it was quite unsettling because I realized that I hadn't captured their complete attention. It was very, very important for me to do that.
I saw that with Baryshnikov once. I saw him in the White Oak Project and he performs in complete silence. And the audience got really unnerved and every second person started clearing their throat and having a little cough, to the point that it got really loud and he turned around in the middle of his performance and did the same thing back to the audience.
Oh my God, that's so audacious, isn't it?
Well, good on him, because it was almost rude because people weren't thinking about, I think they were unedged by the silence.
Right.
It was interesting. It was just interesting. But like you say, they could be completely silent, but you're doing what you need to do on stage and you can feel it. I think that's really beautiful.
And they're used to being carried away by music, obviously.
Yes.
So having the challenge of seeing dance silent in front of their eyes must have been very, very difficult.
Yeah, must have been. It's interesting. It is another example, I suppose, of the connection and disconnection there. And maybe it was intentional. Who knows? He might have done that every performance. Who knows?
And we need our audiences. There's nothing better after a show than seeing these faces at the stage door and having that feedback and how a performance made them feel. It was really, really important to me to hear an audience's point of view about how you did and how it made them feel, and signing their programs. That it was something I really enjoyed. It wasn't a task for me at all to be there talking to people after a show, no matter how tired I was.
How gorgeous. And did you sometimes, depending on the production, of course, did you sometimes notice that mums would bring their little girls with their ballet buns? It's just adorable.
Oh, it's so, so adorable. And, I've got to tell you a little story. Recently, last week, I went to see Frozen, the musical.
Oh, yes.
Just recently reopened in London. And I tell you what, it made my heart feel so good seeing these little girls dressed up as fairies, so excited to be running into the theatre. And for me, it wasn't just about seeing them seeing Frozen, it was, for me, oh my goodness, we're suddenly seeing all these young children becoming interested in the theatre.
Yes.
And been away from it for so long with the pandemic. And these little kids that are seeing Frozen are then going to go on and go to the opera house and see Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, all the modern works, or go into the theatre, see, Stoppard, Pinter, etc. I thought I was so delighted to see that in London, at least, we're coming out of this pandemic and the theatres are opening and we're going to have a new surge of young blood becoming interested in the theatre.
Yes. Wouldn't that be wonderful? I think it's important for the livelihood of the theatre. It's so important.
Keep it all alive. And and talking about audiences, there's your audience.
Get in touch with Southern FM on 90886466. Text 0404 000 736 and find us online southernfm.com.au.
This is Leanne and welcome back to Arts and Entertainment. We continue our interview with world-acclaimed ballet dancer and now dance coach Leanne Benjamin. Now tell me, you've talked about how ballet is taught in a vastly different way, or the companies work in vastly different ways now. And I'm just wondering, are well-being and mindfulness taught more or integrated more into what is coached or taught in ballet schools?
Well, I'm delighted to say, Leanne, that it is on the top of their list now.
Great.
It's just part of school life, company life. And I'm incredibly delighted to see this. The focus and emphasis is not just on physical well-being, but on mental health.
Yes, yes. And one of the things that triggered me asking that question is in the book, you say something very interesting about learning ballet in Rockhampton, and it's something I had never, ever heard before. And that is that there were no mirrors. There was a mirror inside a cupboard and there were no mirrors on the wall. And now that taught you that you didn't want your dancers looking in the mirror at themselves. It's your job to tell them what they're doing wrong and right. It's not the mirror's job. How important is that to mental well-being?
Oh, gosh, you're going to make a lot of dancers that know me laugh, because I spend my entire rehearsal saying, please stop looking in the mirror. You can't feel what you're doing if you don't look into the mirror. I'm your eyes now. If you want to practice in a studio and look at yourself, that's all very well. But how can you be absorbed in what you're doing if you're constantly turning around to check yourself in the mirror? You see a lot of these great dancers, Lynn Seymour, even wonderful actresses and actors in the world of dance, that they couldn't possibly be absorbed if they're checking out how their foot looks, their leg looks, their arm looks. Of course, it is an important aspect of the profession to be looking at yourself constantly. We have to. We're looking through mirrors, but I did think it was a very healthy upbringing for me not to be able to look in the mirror and to be able to just feel dance, to feel what it was like and take instruction from my teacher.
How important then is confidence? The confidence not to look in a mirror?
I think it is very difficult, particularly in these incredible modern studios today, that often they're surrounded by 3 or 4 sides, these mirrors. And it's a difficult art. It's a difficult profession, because you're not only judged by your ability, but you are judged by your physicality. And rightly or wrongly, you do have to have certain contributions physically in order to be able to show beautiful lines and to dance well. But it doesn't mean that you should be judged too early on in your life. You've got plenty of time. You've got to go through, particularly with women, you've got to go through puberty. The body is going to change over the years.
Yes.
And I think as teachers and directors and, adjudicators and examiners, we can't judge youngsters too early. You've got to look at talent, make sure that you have enough of the physical contributions, of course, but we need to see how talent develops over the years before you make a judgment about whether someone is right or wrong for the profession.
And that gives them time, and they can decide too where their heart sits on all of that as well.
That's right.
It's very fair.
And also, I do mention this in my book, and it's something that I've thought long and hard about. Not everyone wants to be in the top company, in a top ballet company, centre stage. There are so many companies out there. And also there are many different levels in a company. There's the corps de ballet, there are choreophées or senior corps de ballet members and soloists and senior soloists and principals, and there are also character actors.
That's right.
So there's a lot of opportunity to be placed in different categories in a company.
So a little girl who has a dream of being a principal dancer may not end up there, but they may end up being a character dancer or some other level, if you like.
Look, I think that you have to be fulfilled in anything you do. If your dream and your desire is only to be a principal dancer and you are unable to reach those heights for various reasons, then I suggest you work as hard as you can to get there, but if it doesn't work out for you, you go and do something else.
I have a family member who trained to be a professional dancer, and I said, look, this may only work for you till you're 30. You need a plan B of something else that you really, truly feel equally as passionate about, and start searching for that now as well. Is that good advice?
It's very good advice, and I think we're so lucky in the world of dance today. If, for instance, in London, we have an organisation called the Dancers Career Development, and they're there at all times for anybody in dance that may wish to leave the stage, and helps them to decide how they're going to use their transferable skills from dance in order to learn a different skill. They might stay in dance, they might go and apprentice somewhere else for a different institution, or retrain altogether.
I started Pilates when it just arrived in this country because I was working with dancers, and I used to not want a physiotherapist Pilates expert. I wanted someone who'd been a professional dancer, and they were always stricter with my Pilates training than the physiotherapists.
I think that's probably because they had to be very strict in order to become a principal dancer in a company.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And anyway, this isn't about me. On a lighter note, just before we go, on a lighter note, there's a certain beverage that's been very special to you during your career. And now probably people are thinking champagne, but no.
That's today's beverage, I can tell you that.
Oh, well and good. No, what was the beverage? Tell us about it.
Are you talking about my hot chocolate?
Yes.
Oh, gosh. Well, from a young age in Rockhampton, I grew up with Milo.
Oh, yes.
Stained me forever. I don't think it was necessarily the nutritional side of the Milo that I was interested in. I think it was the chocolate crunchy bit on top of the milk.
Well, that's right. I used to think Milo was a grain and it was healthy for you, but then I looked at the ingredients one day and went, this is full of chocolate.
Well, what's so funny that you say that, Leanne, is I always thought it was a health drink.
Yes,
Until I encouraged my son to try it. And he looked at the tin, because, of course, these kids are so highly educated and so into nutrition these days. I would have never looked at the side of the tin, only what was in it. Yes, and he said, Mum, this is just full of sugar. There's really not a lot of health.
You'd burn it off, though. That's the difference.
I absolutely loved a Milo, and hot chocolate, as you know from my book, which rides right through the book, is a drink that has always settled me. From the early days of Rockhampton, we were always given those little bottles of milk at school.
Oh, yes.
I loved the Milo on top because of the chocolate and the crunchiness, and it's just a drink that I've always enjoyed. So everyone knows me in the canteen at the Opera House. Here's Leanne, she'll be wanting her very chocolatey hot chocolate now. I mean, it's not healthy now, particularly now with the dancers I'm surrounded by. They're so health conscious. They really are.
Yes.
They really know how to fuel their bodies. They're incredibly educated about how to make the most of your physicality while exerting all the energy that you need to be a ballet dancer.
It's a bit like sports people too, I imagine. It would be similar to the diet of a professional footballer, say.
You really do need to take care of your body. But what is so fantastic about dance is that we have the opportunity to incorporate sport, athleticism, acting, the dancing, the portraying a story.
Oh, and all with music. All with the beautiful music. The musicality is amazing.
we are so lucky to have music as a dancer completely throughout our lives, from the ballet class. I love ballet music, right through to every performance.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's wonderful.
I have to say, Leanne, that the thing that really made me interested in dancing was the music. I grew up with music. My dad had a record player, and one of the records that I remember putting on in the living room and dancing around to was Chopin.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew all those nocturnes and preludes that I used to sit and love listening to. And throughout my career, having had that chance to move to music, from the ballet bar right through to performance, is an extraordinary gift, because it allows you, to throw yourself into the atmosphere of what that music is saying and tell a story.
Your grandfather was a musician. Is that where that started?
Oh, well, my grandfather was very, very talented. He was a choir master at the local church, and he played the piano fantastically. So much so that he played for the silent films in Rockhampton.
Ah.
I've had so many happy memories sitting next to him, play the piano. He drew me into loving music. And I think that was the inspiration for why I wanted to dance. Music makes you want to dance.
Yes, yes. Well, let's hope music makes everyone want to dance at home at the moment.
Well, I think this is the great plus. One of the only pluses about the pandemic is that, speaking on behalf of dance, I think it's made everybody realise that movement is so important.
Yes.
And I think, people have got up and done their little classes in front of the TV, or made sure that they've had their walks or runs. And, there's been, I think, before this, we probably didn't realise the impact of how much physical health helps our mental well-being.
Well, our government here in Victoria has just extended our 2-hour exercise outdoors to 4. So show me someone who does 4 hours of exercise in a day.
Oh my gosh.
We're up to almost, Olympic athletic level here.
I know. That's fabulous.
Well, Leanne Benjamin, thank you so much. It's been a real honour today. I hope we get to talk to you again. But for people interested in your book, it's called Built for Ballet, written by Leanne Benjamin and Sarah Crompton, published by Melbourne Books. So you've published here in Australia, and available from all excellent bookstores, I would say, and online, of course. Thank you so much.
Leanne, it's been such a pleasure to chat to you today, and thank you so much for interrogating me about Built for Ballet.